listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. They're being called drug promotions in disguise, and experts warn they could be encouraging the overdiagnosis or overuse of meds that you don't even need.
These things are not designed to inform, they're not designed to enlighten, they're not designed to empower. They're designed to maximise markets for new and expensive medicines which carry very serious risks.
That deep dive into the so-called drug awareness ads popping up all over your socials, how to spot them and how they're even legal is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Thursday the 30th of October.
Hey Tara, and to you listening. We're starting overseas where Anthony Albanese has for the second time in just over a week dined with Donald Trump, this time being joined by 6 other world leaders. They're in South Korea for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC summit, of which both Australia and the US are members.
1 in 4 of Australian jobs depends upon trade, and 75% of Australia's trade is with APEC nations.
The PM was seated next to the US president with the leaders of Canada, New Zealand, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam and of course South Korea also at the table. But before doing so, Albo actually received a ringing endorsement from Trump, who praised him for doing a, quote, fantastic job and described their meeting last week in Washington, where they signed a multi-billion-dollar critical minerals deal, as great. And while there was plenty of banter, with Trump telling New Zealand's Prime Minister his hair was beautiful, despite him being bald, and pleasantries, when he thanked the South Korean president for his warm welcome.
You rolled out a red carpet, beautiful red carpet.
All eyes and interests are actually on his highly anticipated upcoming meeting with China's Xi Jinping.
Tomorrow I meet with President Xi of China, and I look forward to that. And we've been talking a lot over the last month, and I think we're going to have something that's going to be very satisfactory to China and to us.
It'll be the first time they've met since Trump returned to the White House this year, with allies hopeful the two economic powerhouses can settle their ongoing trade war and tit-for-tat tariffs that have thrown so much of the global economy into uncertainty. And of course, Anthony Albanese is today going to have a massive pep in his step with that, little endorsement by Trump. But also he's going to be watching this meeting with a keen eye, given that, the US is our top defense partner, and now with this critical minerals deal, a significant economic partner, and also the fact that China is our top economic partner. So a lot of skin in the game here for us too.
Thousands of child abuse allegations are stemming from Australian childcare centres nationwide each year, with an increasing amount of child abuse material also being filmed. In Victoria alone, there's been over 700 reports of alleged physical and sexual abuse and neglect of children in the sector in a single year. A new report by the state's Child Commissioner shows the number of cases referred to the agency increased by over 30% in a year, while the rates have doubled since 2020.
The revelation comes after horrific abuse allegations came to light in recent years relating to former early childhood educators Joshua Dale Brown from Victoria and Ashley Paul Griffith in Queensland, who are each accused of countless depraved acts against children in their care. According to authorities, the men were among users of an online child abuse network where information on how to access and get close to kids is shared, specifically information about centres.
Yeah, and experts say predators are basically known to purposely target centres suffering from staff shortages, relaxed regulations and high turnover, and that they will take on casual roles to kind of shop around until finding one that's suitable that'll allow them to better access children. Forensic and clinical psychologist Dr Michael Burke told the ABC, Australians do not realise the amount of predators there are around us.
Estimates range from 1% to 5% of society have some sort of sexual interest in children. That's a scary number. That means out of every 100 people, there's someone that has a sexual interest in children.
He also says there's a significantly high proportion of abuse happening in for-profit centres, where those issues we mentioned earlier, like staff shortages, are more likely to occur. Now, we did do a deep dive into this topic earlier in the week. We'll chuck a link to that in our show notes.
To the Caribbean now, where a hurricane dubbed the storm of the century is leaving a trail of destruction, claiming dozens of lives and forcing hundreds of thousands to flee their homes. Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica on Tuesday as a Category 5 storm with winds of up to 300 kilometres per hour, becoming the strongest Atlantic hurricane on record before weakening and moving to Cuba yesterday. Samuel Zinzan-Zif is an Australian in Jamaica, which has since been declared a disaster area where around 77% of the island is currently without power. He spoke to SBS about the chaos in the capital, Kingston, yesterday.
Last night, I pretty much had to tie myself to my bed just in case the roof fell off. It was really scary. So we were just getting all this wind and the rain and stuff. And it's just, lots of flooding. And we've just had pretty heavy rain and a consistent wind.
The system's now moved off the shore of Cuba, where officials are reporting torn off roofs, collapsed homes, blocked roads, and at least 735,000 people still in shelters. And while it's been downgraded to a Category 2 hurricane, it has impacted countries outside its path, including Haiti, where flooding has caused a main river to burst its banks, causing dozens of homes to collapse and killing at least 25 people. It's expected to cross to the Bahamas today and then Bermuda, and is not expected to make landfall in North America.
The death of a woman left behind by a cruise touring the Great Barrier Reef has sparked heated debate about Australian maritime safety standards. The 80-year-old woman was a guest on the Coral Expedition's Coral Adventurer, a boat about to embark on a 60-day tour around Australia. It made its first stop in far north Queensland at Lizard Island, which is about 300 kilometres north of Cairns and right on the Great Barrier Reef.
According to authorities, the woman took part in a guided hike of the highest peak on Lizard Island on Saturday, but had to stop, telling the group she was with she'd rejoin them on the cruise later. The woman, however, failed to reboard the ship, which then left the island without her, before realising and returning later that night to conduct a search for the 80-year-old in the national park. On Sunday, the woman's body was located, with her death since reported to the coroner.
According to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, tour operators are required to have systems in place to check passenger numbers and to ensure no one's left behind. For example, some use things like head counts. AMSA's also investigating this incident.
And hit the high sting. And it's the crime story that just keeps giving. But now, the two suspects arrested over the $156 million Louvre crown jewel heist have reportedly admitted their involvement. 2 of 4 men believed to be involved were arrested on Saturday after the elaborate and brazen under 7-minute daylight robbery, which saw them dress up as maintenance workers and use a truck and lift ladder to break into the first floor of the Louvre's Apollo Gallery before escaping with nearly $160 million in jewels. Now, the story has since captured the world's attention, and clearly ours, Chris, with the window that was broken into becoming a tourist attraction of its own, and a lot of chatter in newsrooms, I think, including us, clearly.
Yes, but look, authorities have now foiled suggestions of a potential inside job, saying there's no evidence to suggest the 4 men had help from anyone who worked at the museum. The pair who were arrested were identified after their DNA was found on broken glass and one of the getaway scooters, while the 2 others are still at large.
I just really feel like that maybe these guys watched a few too many Oceans movies, because this sounds awfully like the plot of Ocean's 8, but I don't know. What's a bet we see this exact plot make it into a Netflix or Stan movie in the next year, Chris?
Oh, yeah. I want you to aim higher. I want you to aim for Apple Plus. I want the premium, the cream of the crop here, Tara. Now, look, that is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is Helen Smith's deep dive into the so-called drug awareness ads popping up all over socials. You might not even realise you've been watching them. Stick around. That deep dive is coming up for you next.
Have you ever heard of an awareness ad for a drug? Well, pharmaceutical companies have been running them out in Australia, and you might have come across one on your social media feed without knowing, because most of them don't even mention drugs or medicine. Now, in Australia, it's illegal to advertise prescription medicines directly to the public. So how are these awareness ads legal? And experts are arguing that these so-called disease awareness campaigns are acting as drug promotions in disguise, with some saying the pharmaceutical industry is potentially encouraging the overdiagnosis or overuse of drugs. Dr Ray Moynihan is a senior research manager at the University of Sydney who says that these ad campaigns turn people into patients. Dr. Ray, how would you describe awareness ads for drugs?
Of course, it's a good thing to have awareness about public health issues, about diseases, about conditions, about how we can respond to them. But to allow drug companies to run awareness campaigns about diseases for which their drugs are used to treat seems utterly counterproductive. And these things are not really disease awareness campaigns, these drug company-sponsored activities. They're more like disease mongering. They're about trying to expand the markets for their medicines. They're about trying to change the way we think about conditions and risk factors. And they're really trying to focus, with a laser-like focus on expanding the markets for their new medicines.
We'll get into some of the ways that they're trying to do that through these ads in a moment. But firstly, could you just explain, why is it illegal in Australia to advertise prescription medications or prescription medicines directly to the public?
Well, the reason is that when you advertise prescription medicines directly to the public, it's an absolute public health disaster. And that's what we see in the United States. The United States is one of the only markets in the world that allows drug companies to advertise their prescription drugs direct to the public. And so what that means there is that TV news bulletins are full of drug ads. You just have to think of the opioid scandal. And so rational, sensible health systems around the world have very sensibly banned drug companies from advertising their prescription products directly to the public.
So how can these awareness ads or campaigns for drugs be legal then?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'd love to hear what the Australian health authorities have to say about this. In fact, I think the TGA has some real questions to answer here. The Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia has some real questions to answer, because I've just checked the TGA website, and it says very explicitly that the advertising of these drugs is banned, but it also says that if they are promoted in an indirect way, that is also an advertisement, and that is also illegal. And I've looked at these recent so-called disease awareness campaigns that two major international drug companies are sponsoring, and they are clearly indirect advertising for their obesity drugs. And I think that any decent lawyer worth their reputation would very successfully argue that these things are in breach of Australia's restrictions on pharmaceutical advertising.
And what are some of the most common drugs that are being pushed with these awareness ad campaigns? You mentioned there an obesity one.
Yes, so many people will have heard of new obesity drugs. They've been around for a few years. The most common one is Ozempic. We've also got another one called Wegovy, which is essentially the same drug, both produced, promoted by Novo Nordisk. And you've also got Eli Lilly promoting a drug called Mounjaro. These are a class of obesity drugs. There's a lot of controversy around them. But what's important to note here is that these so-called disease awareness campaigns are not new. So over the years, we've seen things like shyness promoted as being a sign of a psychiatric condition called social anxiety disorder. Mild distress promoted as being the sign of major depression and needing to be treated with pills. And most egregiously, we've seen ordinary common sexual difficulties promoted as being the signs of sexual dysfunctions that need to be treated with pills. And so this is not a new thing, but it's very important that the public are aware of the misleading nature of a lot of these campaigns, and that regulators take an interest, in enforcing the law.
How are some of these disease awareness campaigns talking about symptoms or conditions that somebody might have, but then a lot of the time they don't even mention a drug or that it's promoting medicine, for example?
Well, that's right. And that's because we have this ban in Australia on directly advertising prescription medicines. But what the disease awareness ads do that the drug companies are running is that they are indirectly promoting those medicines. They're not naming them. But for example, one of the campaigns appears to be undermining the approach that people might take to try to lose weight by changing their diet. And they are saying that there are other ways of tackling being overweight and obese, and that you should talk to your doctor about those. And very clearly, these are designed to create demand for the drug company product.
You've said that these ads can turn people into patients. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that we'll take the example of obesity that we're discussing. There are huge numbers of Australians, huge proportions of Australians who are overweight or obese. And there are incredibly complex sets of reasons why that is the case. And there are many public health campaigns to try and address that and turn that around. What these disease awareness campaigns by the drug companies are trying to do is trying to turn those people, those millions of people, into patients who will take a medicine long term for this problem. Now, that is not the best way in terms of public health to solve this problem. These drugs are hugely expensive. They carry rare but incredibly serious side effects. So the idea of transforming millions of people into patients to take drugs long term, is a frightening scenario. And regulators here in the past have rejected that. If you look at the PBAC decision, that's the committee that decides on the price of drugs in Australia, they very clearly rejected in recent years this idea that we would treat millions and millions of people with these drugs. It's really a very old marketing strategy. If you can transform the ordinary experiences of life, the ups and downs of human life, into the signs and symptoms of a treatable disease, then you have very, very large markets. And of course, drug companies have a duty to their shareholders to maximise their returns.
What role does the pharmaceutical industry play in expanding symptoms for the usage of a drug, or potentially even creating a new diagnosis for people?
The sad reality is that the pharmaceutical companies have a huge influence over a lot of what happens within the medical establishment. They fund medical journals, they fund scientific studies, they fund medical education for your GP, they fund medical conferences where your specialist goes, they fund patient groups that speak in the media and purport to be independent voices in these debates. Their influence is extraordinary, and their primary interest is maximising markets. They're not designed to engender a rational debate about public health or about how we respond to crises like obesity and overweight. They're very narrowly defined, and they're defined in a way, and they're promoted and they're designed in a way to simplify complex problems and to create simple solutions like pills.
When it comes to social media posts, how can they potentially lead to overdiagnosis or overuse of a drug?
Well, social media, as we know, is the place where many, many, many people get a lot of information from, including health information. The reality is that a lot of the information about medicine and healthcare is misleading. And in fact, we just did a study led by Dr Brooke Nicol from the University of Sydney, finding that an overwhelming proportion of social media posts about medical tests were misleading, were promoting benefits that weren't there, and were ignoring potential harms. Often there were conflicts of interest involved, so that the influencers were receiving financial benefits from those promoting these tests. And so we do have a big problem with misleading information on social media. And in that study, for example, one of the tests we were looking at was the full body MRI. Now, a lot of your listeners may well be seeing things pop up in their feeds promoting the idea that they should go and get a full body MRI. Now, the danger with that, according to expert bodies around the world, is that that will uncover so-called abnormalities that would never cause you any harm. And it will lead to cascades of unnecessary interventions and diagnoses and treatments at enormous cost to you and the health system. And that's why the Australian New Zealand College of Radiologists does not recommend full-body MRIs. That's why the American College of Radiologists does not recommend full-body MRIs. And yet people are seeing daily now in their social media feeds very persuasive advertising, often dressed up as independent advice from influencers to go and undertake a full-body MRI.
Okay, so if someone does come across a disease awareness campaign for drugs, what should they do before they click through or potentially purchase the product?
Look, that's a great question. I think that they should enjoy the production values because they'll probably be quite high production values if it's been produced by a drug company. And they, in order to protect and maintain their health, they should totally and utterly ignore the advertisement. These things are not designed to inform. They're not designed to enlighten. They're not designed to empower. They're designed to maximise markets for new and expensive medicines, which carry very serious risks along with their benefits.
Dr. Ray, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you, Helen.
That was Dr. Ray Moynihan from the University of Sydney there. And thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. While you're there though, if you could subscribe or follow wherever you're listening from, it really is one of the easiest ways you can support everything we do here at The Briefing. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.